So we will see these two questions that were remaining. Okay, different types of legislation in India and construction. Okay, so now when we talk about legislation, legislation is considered as one of the main sources of law. When we talk about different sources, legislation is one of the main sources of law from where laws are derived. It does not matter what kind of law you are talking about. In case of personal laws also, we see some legislation. In case of other laws also, we see legislation playing a very important part. Okay, now what is legislation? It's derived from two words. Legis, letter. Legis means law, letter means making. So it is nothing but a process of lawmaking wherein rules or regulations would be provided in a codified format. It would be written, everything would be clearly given. Now, when we talk about legislations, different legislations serve different purposes. Mostly we see that it specifies rights and responsibilities of individual and authorizes and authorities to whom legislation applies. Mostly we see it would provide some rights to one person, some obligations to another, and maybe some authorities can also be established. Okay, any such authority that you have seen established under a legislation? Any authority established under a legislation? Law Commission. Okay, so Law Commission, yeah, ad hoc body, it's sort of an ad hoc body. There are also authorities who are established just to ensure that whatever is mentioned in the act, right, those things get executed. Law Commission, I think it's established under orders of government. Let me see. Law Commission of India. Yeah, we can say that first one was established under Charter Act, and after that, we have it established for different purposes. Okay, apart from that, also we see different commissions, committees, different authorities being established, like National Green Tribunal. That is also nothing but an authority. We see Human Rights Commission, Child Rights Commission, Labor Commission, Women's Commission. All these are nothing but some authorities established under a legislation. Whatever provisions are given under the legislation, to fulfill those provisions, we ensure that these bodies, different bodies are being set up. Now, when we talk about different types of legislation, there are different types of legislation because legislations are established or legislations are enacted for different purposes. It might be to provide some directions, to approve something, to endorse something, to give, authorize, allow. There are so many different reasons for which a legislation may be established. Okay, more commonly what we see is there are supreme legislation and there are subordinate legislation. Okay, if you start classifying them, there are obviously a lot of different types of legislations. Substantive and procedural legislations. You might see legislations like primary and secondary legislation, supreme and subordinate legislation, welfare legislation, repealing legislation. So many different types are there. So let's focus on supreme and subordinate legislation because these are considered as two very important types of legislation that we see. Now, when we talk about supreme legislation, what is it? It's nothing but a legislation that is made by the sovereign authority of the state. It cannot be repealed, controlled, or amended by any other authority. Whoever is making that, it is like the sovereign supreme authority. So that same authority would be having the power to make changes, etc. Okay, mostly that same authority would be having the power. Now, it is enacted by the highest lawmaking body. If we talk about India, we have so many thousands of legislations which are made by Parliament, right? And these are applicable in entire India. And mostly we see that only Parliament is having power to make changes there. Yes, there are some legislations where like state enactments might be allowed, that even though law is made by Parliament, states can make some changes as per their convenience. That might be allowed, but as a general rule, If Parliament is making a legislation, Parliament would be having the authority to make changes. Okay, same ways when we talk about Constitution of India, which we call as supreme law of land, right? Initially, it was assumed that, okay, because Constitution is framed by a constituent assembly, not by the Parliament. So if you want to make any changes in Constitution, it has to come from some constituent assembly only. Parliament cannot make that change. But later on, that view was changed because Constitution itself provides that power to Parliament. So it is very clear now that Parliament can make changes. But then state legislature cannot make changes in the Constitution, right? So same ways we have some supreme legislations which are made by the supreme lawmaking authority, and that same authority would be in a general sense, they only would be having the authority to make changes, etc. Okay, the authority of these acts may not be supreme. Even though we are saying that it is a supreme legislation, it might not be that, okay, fine, today a legislation is enacted means that is going to remain there forever. Because in India, judiciary is given a lot more importance, right? So if the law is violating anything, something is wrong or anything, then in such cases, it may be considered as unconstitutional also, because everything has to follow whatever is mentioned in the Constitution at the end of the day. So even though a law is made by Parliament, we have seen situations wherein it's considered as an unconstitutional law just because it was violating the supreme law of land in India. Okay, so supreme legislation is nothing but a legislation or a law framed by using the legislative power, like the direct power which is given to the supreme legislative body. Okay. And we have so many laws made by the Parliament that would fall under this classification. Next one is subordinate legislation. Subordinate legislation, and when we talk about it as a concept, it's nothing but something like delegated legislation. Okay, it is subordinate, as in it's coming under somebody else. Like we say Supreme Court and High Court are higher courts, and after that subordinate court comes. That means subordinate courts are coming under the High Court, right? They don't have that much of power or authority like as Supreme Court and High Courts are having, right? Same ways we have something called as subordinate legislation. So what is subordinate legislation? It is which proceeds from any other authority other than the sovereign power. So it's not sovereign power. If we take the example of India, it's not made by Parliament, but it is made by some other authorities. Law made by some other authorities. It is made by an entity under a power delegated to it by Parliament, also known as delegated legislation. It's not that they do not have a power and they are simply framing a law. They do have that power, but it is given to them, it is delegated, it is transferred to them by Parliament. Okay, it is necessary for legislative power to be delegated because it saves the undue pressure. Parliament cannot take care of every single thing that is happening, right? So major things Parliament would take care of. Remaining things it may pass on its power to some subordinate authorities as well. So subordinate legislation would include some rules, regulations, policies, notices, proclamations, etc., which are framed for day-to-day functioning of some different bodies. There are mainly 5 types of subordinate legislations. Some examples would be like Delhi Municipal Corporation, okay, Mumbai Municipal Corporation. They are framing their own rules and regulations. Why these rules and regulations are framed? For easy functioning. These are also nothing but just like a law, it would be applicable, right? Mostly you would see that do not throw garbage here, this much of fine would be imposed, or maybe this is how you need to dispose of your garbage. If you are not following it, might be some rules may be applicable from municipalities. Okay, now these are certain things you need to do in order to ensure that this area is safe and proper for everyone. Okay, otherwise some rules might be applicable. Like during first wave of COVID, we had seen, right, BBMP was like catching these stray dogs, right? Because stray dogs were disturbing the neighborhood a lot, so they would come and they would just collect all of those stray dogs and they would just take them somewhere. And case was also filed. After that, there were like High Court ask them to stop that particular practice. So what was it? In order to ensure safety of the people in entire like area which is coming under BBMP, they took that particular step, which is nothing but some rules that they were following. Right, like that we can see many different rules which are being followed. Some municipal areas, you would say, if you are having like maybe like 10-20 dogs you are having in your house and they are like barking like anything and they are disturbing the neighborhood, their municipal people would come and they would even take those dogs from your house also, even though they were your pets. You were taking care of them. Even though they are barking within your campus. Even after that, municipality would take them. Like that, some rules and regulations are there which apply in that specific municipal area only. Okay, those are nothing but subordinate legislation. As such, Parliament is not making those laws, but for smooth functioning, these laws are framed. Okay, same ways you would see even high courts would make a lot of rules and regulations regarding how the high court would be governed, how its subordinate courts would be governed. We see many rules and regulations like that. Okay, what would be the fee you need to pay, how you need to proceed. All these rules and regulations are mostly taken care of by high courts. So these are nothing but subordinate legislation. Okay, is the difference clear? Supreme and subordinate. So supreme is like the topmost, okay, and subordinate is some other authorities are delegated or transferred the power that you can also make some laws. Now, what are different types of subordinate legislation? These are colonial legislation, executive legislation, judicial legislation, legislation under local self-government, autonomous legislation. Now, during the time of Britishers, when they were ruling us, we see many legislations were applicable and we are still following those legislations. We see that, okay, this is a colonial legislation. Some provisions you would see that, okay, fine, this might be like when you are reading the Code of Civil Procedure, right, transfer of property, sometimes you might feel that, okay, this amount is like very less. Why is it mentioned? Because this is a legislation which is coming from such a long time, right? So some things you might feel like, okay, why this provision is even added there? Okay, so like that also we say, because these are colonial legislation from a very long time, these are being followed. Okay, now, and these legislations, it's not just about India, even Pakistan you see. Okay, Pakistan is also following the same kind of, almost the same kind of transfer of property act, code of civil procedure, same things they are also following, right? So these are examples of colonial legislation, that it was a legislation where British Parliament had the power to make all those changes so that they can function smoothly. Okay, those laws were made, and because those laws were already properly functioning, it just continued, right? Because we have provisions under Article 13 of Constitution also. If the law is fine, if it's not violating the Constitution or anything, then we can continue with that law also, no problem over there. Same ways we see many colonial legislations which we are still following today. Courts are governed by those as well. Same ways we see executive legislation. So executive legislation, what is executive legislation? Otherwise, lawmaking is a duty that legislature is having, right? So the legislature often entrusts its lawmaking power to an executive organ of the government. In pursuance of such delegated powers, they make some laws. Take, for example, some ordinances are passed, right? Ordinances would be applicable for emergency times. Ordinance can be applied. And when we look at again Article 13 of Constitution, there it says law not only includes the statutes or the acts that we have, it might even include ordinance, some orders passed, bylaws, rules, regulations, notification, custom usages, etc. So many executive orders also we see that are being passed, right? Like Modi says that, okay, fine, from tomorrow there is nationwide lockdown. That is done by way of some order or notification. That is also being followed, right? It might happen that some resolution is there, some proclamation is there, whereby president is saying that from tomorrow there is going to be national emergency. That's also something which becomes applicable, right? Some notices, notifications might be issued that from tomorrow 500 rupees notes will be banned. All these are nothing but executive legislation. Executive is taking some action, based on that it becomes a law. After that, 500 rupees, nobody would be accepting. After that, you cannot go out without taking special permission if there is nationwide lockdown. Right? So all these different things are also considered as a law. It's not just about those statutes which we see that is coming from the legislature. Okay, same ways, we also have judicial legislation. Now, powers delegated to judicial system to make and implement their own laws to maintain transparency in the judicial system of the country. This will ensure that there is no involvement of any other organ of the government in governance of the judicial system. Supreme Court and High Courts are entrusted with lawmaking power. Supreme Court can say that, okay, fine, from tomorrow, these are the guidelines that we need to follow. And those guidelines become applicable just like a law. Right? Supreme Court might say that, okay, we don't have any laws to provide for witness protection. From tomorrow, here is a scheme, witness protection scheme, and this scheme is going to be applicable, and it just applies that particular way. Right? So there are some judicial legislations also wherein some decisions of the court, some like some guidelines given, or some schemes may be given authority of law, whereby court says that from tomorrow, until and unless we have a legislation in this regard, this scheme is going to be applicable in order to provide protection to witnesses. And that same thing becomes applicable over there. Okay, that also we see. Same ways we also see rules that are passed by the high courts relating to how subordinate courts should function. During COVID, we had seen that Supreme Court realized this matter, that courts cannot be closed for a very long time. So what we need to do is we need to shift to online filing of cases, hearing of cases, etc. There, Supreme Court had ordered, or rather requested, the high courts that you need to come up with some rules and regulations how the subordinate courts within your jurisdiction can shift to this online mode. Okay, so those rules and regulations, whatever high courts came up with, those are also nothing but judicial legislations. It helped the courts to function during that point in time, right? All these are nothing but judicial legislations. So subordinate legislations are mainly something which helps in day-to-day functioning and all those things to the other bodies. Same ways, when we talk about the government, okay, we have central government, we have state government. Apart from that, also we have some local bodies, okay, local self-governing institutions. These are some institutions who are given enough powers that they can function like self-governing institutions. They don't need approval for every single thing from the parliament or something. They can take care of their own functions themselves. Okay, this is nothing but local self-government. Examples of local self-government are like municipal corporations, municipal boards, Jilla Parishads, Panchayats, okay, some committees, all these bodies which are there, these are called as local self-government. They are also entrusted with some powers and functions, and they are taking care of those matters themselves. Okay. Now, when they are taking care of these matters, they also have some bylaws. Bylaws as in some laws which should be applicable only for that specific body. Maybe municipal corporation, Delhi Municipal Corporation, Mumbai Municipal Corporation, okay, is framing some bylaws. It would be applicable only in their jurisdiction. Only in Bombay it's going to be applicable. Only in Delhi it's going to be applicable. So these are nothing but bylaws. So these kind of bylaws are also framed so that they can function properly. Like we see town planning. What all things you need to do. Okay, you would see there is RERA, Real Estate Regulatory Authority. RERA can also make some changes, state specific, they can make some changes. Okay, these rules and regulations you need to follow. For municipal corporations, for doing so many things, you would require permission of municipal corporations. Okay, these are nothing but the rules and regulations that we follow. It is framed by that specific body only. The rules that BMC, Bombay Municipal Corporation, follows, it might not be same with BBMP, it might not be same with Delhi Municipal Corporation. because they are given this power that you can frame your own rules and regulations depending on what suits your needs. Okay, this is legislation under local self-government. Same ways we have autonomous legislation. We see, right, there are autonomous universities, right? So autonomous universities and all, they would also need some rules and regulations for them to function properly. In exceptional cases, the legislative powers of the state are delegated into entities such as universities, companies, corporations, etc., to make bylaws for regulating their business. This kind of legislation is categorized as autonomous legislation. So autonomous universities are there who would make their own laws, who will frame their own syllabus, they will conduct their examination, everything would be done by themselves. And that power is also granted to them because parliament or the state legislature cannot take care of every single thing. So these different bodies, right, apart from the main parliament or the state legislature also, these different bodies are given the power or authority that whatever laws or rules you require for you to function smoothly, there you have some rights. Okay, you have some rights, you can frame a law. Yes, if somebody feels that this law is violating, this law is taking away some rights or anything, they can go to the court, they can even challenge validity of those things, but right has been given that yes, you can make your own laws so that whatever functions you need to perform, you can perform it very smoothly without seeking permission of parliament or state legislature for every single activity. Okay, is it clear? Vani, is it clear? And when we talk about primary and secondary, right, this is also something similar only. Primary is in the main legislation, and secondary is in something that we need to support those activities. Like parliament is making the main legislations. Apart from that, also we may need certain rules and regulations. Okay, like when we talk about a university might be framed. University is framed under an act of the maybe state legislature or maybe parliament also. Okay, central university established. After that, for every single thing that is happening in the university, they would not bother the parliament or state legislature. They will take some decisions themselves, and that power is given to them. Okay, that is nothing but their subordinate legislation. They can frame laws, whatever is required for them to function smoothly.